first of the evening, we have Anna Hughes. She is director of Flight Free UK and has worked in behaviour change for over a decade. So she's a long distance cyclist and author. So she has written her first publication called Eat, Sleep, Cycle. And this was after her first 4,000 mile cycle around the UK. So super exciting. I can't wait to hear more from Anna. And second, we have Davis Vilums, so a passionate cyclist who spent a period of 4 years cycling every street, mews, main road, yard, park, trail and path through central London, essentially or finally making an animated map of all the streets that he had cycled. So I'm very excited to learn more from Davis this evening. And last but not least, we'll have Sam and Jayne. So they are a real life couple who have cycled the world together. So this started from Sam convincing Jayne to swap her bus commute to work for a bike ride for her commute. So I don't know how he started there and they ended up on a world tour together on a bike. That seems like quite a jump, but excited to learn more. So yeah, without further ado, we'll start with Anna.
So as Rox said, I am in Glasgow at the moment at the COP Climate Summit. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but first of all, I'm going to talk to you about my life as a flight-free adventurer and long-distance cyclist. The picture that you can see before you is the, oh, hang on, I should probably, Rox, is it possible to spotlight me? But I think everybody can see me anyway, so I'll carry on. So this is my touring bicycle, and typically loaded with things that I need for an adventure. You can see as well on my panniers, it says Sustrans, so very on brand. I worked for Sustrans approximately 10 years ago, so possibly when you started, Rox. And I worked as a bike officer in behaviour change, encouraging people to ride their bikes rather than take cars for short trips. And one of my motivations for doing that was simply my passion for cycling and my desire to share that with more and more people. So my everyday bike riding evolved into long distance cycling. And my very first long distance ride was 10 years ago. So this time 10 years ago, I had just finished. This is me on day one of my 4,000 mile ride around the coast of Britain. I had in mind for a long time that I wanted to go on a big bike ride. But I'll also talk about this. As I said, I'm a flight-free adventurer, and I had made that decision that I didn't want to fly over 12 years ago. But I still wanted to explore the world. So I thought, well, how can I do that? How can I see everything I want to see? How can I have that adventurous life? How can I travel? How can I experience new things without getting on a plane? So I thought, well, the bicycle makes sense, but also my thought process went, well, I could go to another country and cycle and discover that country, but actually it made more sense to stick within my own country. I kind of felt like it felt a bit wrong perhaps to go somewhere else to explore another country when I knew so little about my own. So that was my motivation for staying in Britain. And I decided I would take on the longest continuous route I could. So lots of people ride from Land's End to John O'Groats, but for me, it was going to be a coastal ride. So here I am on day one, ready to head along the River Thames. So this is Tower Bridge in the centre of London, and where I lived at the time, and I was going to follow the River Thames until it became the sea, and then follow the sea until it became the Thames again, and all the way back into London. So it was a very kind of poetic trip. I quite liked the circular nature of it. You know, I just had to keep following the coastline until it ran out, basically. By the way, it wasn't quite that simple. And there's a lot more route finding than just keeping the sea on your right. But it was my first ever tour. I'd never been on the bike tour before, and I just did not know what I was doing. Oh my goodness. I'm sure that everybody in the audience who has been on a bike tour before can recognize that. The first one, you're just so naive, you don't know what you're doing. I didn't even take a speller in a tube. It's okay, I knew how to pack to puncture, but lots of things that that weren't quite right. And I did worry quite a lot about it. I worried, is everything going to be okay? What if this happens? What if my bike breaks? What if I get lost? What if? And I learned very quickly that when you're on the road, everything fades away, and the simplicity of the open road really does teach you everything you need to know. And I felt that very much in my cycle trips after that. The road teaches you what you need to know, and now I'm always kind of prepared. Now I'm always feeling that I kind of know what I'm doing, which is brilliant. Well, when I say always, I'm not sure that's entirely true, but anyway, as I said, the motivation for the ride, or some of the things I was trying to find, were those surprising new cultures, new landscapes, anything that would kind of teach me about the place I was and would teach me about myself. And one of my other thoughts was, could I find this in the UK? Could I find that adventure without leaving these shores? And the answer was absolutely yes. So there were certain places that just completely took my breath away. And remarkably, I suppose places that people tend to overlook. So we talk about the UK as a tourist destination. We maybe think of Cornwall, which is beautiful, of course. We maybe think of Western Scotland. They seem to be the places that people pick. But there were, before I got to Western Scotland, I went up the East Coast first, and some of the stretches of the East Coast, especially on the Northumberland coast, especially on the East Coast of Scotland, heading north of Aberdeen, are just absolutely stunning. Places that there's so much sand. One particular place north of Aberdeen, the 4V Nature Reserve, it really felt like the Sahara, so much sand. I honestly felt I was the first person on earth to ever go there. These are the experiences that make life adventurous. So those are the kinds of things that make it all unique. I must apologise for the people in the background, by the way. I am in a public place in the Strathclyde University Union, having just done a talk about flight-free travel. So it's a bit of a around and about day for me. Of course, then I did reach the north coast of Scotland, which was absolutely epic. So you have huge mountains, the size of which I'd never really seen before. Going self-propelled on your bicycle is just the most wonderful way to discover these places. Really satisfying and fully involved in the adventure. So after Scotland, it was down into Wales, very windy Wales. There was a day that it was so windy, I got blown off my bike. In hindsight, it's easy to kind of tell that as an entertaining story, but at the time it was terrifying. The wind was so strong in my face that I couldn't physically push against it, and it blew me off my bike. I really hurt my leg in doing so. But these are the times that test you, and it's kind of where you learn the most, I think, about yourself and your capabilities and your ability to stretch yourself and to dig deep for those reserves of your mental strength and your physical strength, and those are the things that shape any journey. After that, I got back to the south coast of England and riding around Devon and Cornwall. Thank goodness I had already got 3,000 miles in my legs, because the hills in Devon and Cornwall are absolutely insane, completely the hardest in the entirety of Britain. And I know because I've cycled around the whole thing. But equally, the views absolutely made up for it. So it was one of the most stunning places that I'd been to. And I arrived back home on Tower Bridge 10 weeks after leaving. And I had absolutely ticked all the boxes of what adventure should be. But more than that, I had convinced I kind of answered that question, can I have an adventure without leaving the UK? And the answer was absolutely yes. And rather than make me feel, well, I've seen the UK now, I can now have my foreign travel, it made me even more passionate about exploring these shores. And I knew that there was as much to see as I had already seen. And as Roxanne said, I then wrote a book about the journey, Eat, Sleep, Cycle. If I were a proper marketing person, I would have a copy right here, but if you want to have a look, you can buy one off my website, annacycles.co.uk. I'll send you a signed copy. But that was a book about the journey. And to promote the book, I did another cycle tour, which was Land's End to John O'Groats. So that was kind of the classic UK journey that lots of people do. And so rather than going around the coast, it was straight up the middle, and it was absolutely fantastic as well. More things to see, more places I'd not been to, but equally places I had visited on the around Britain trip, including John O'Groats, as you can see from the picture. So yeah, this is me after a month on the road. I really took my time, because every day I gave a talk about the Around Britain journey, and I sold books, and yeah, I had a big box of books on the back of the bike, which definitely added to the luggage. So those are my two kind of big UK tours, but there have also been lots of other smaller ones, various coast to coast, and various I was in the Cairngorms a few years ago, and kind of loops around various parts of the UK, always finding new things to discover. Now, one of the things I love doing is swimming in the sea. I swam off the north coast of Scotland on the Land's End to John O'Groats trip, and it's freezing, but very invigorating. And so a few years ago, I decided I wanted to swap the North Sea for the Mediterranean. So I was going to cycle across France. Now, this was in 2019. So here is the route I chose: Dieppe to Nice. So I could get a ferry to Dieppe and cycle the 700 miles all the way to Nice. And you will see on this map that there is a little case of passing by Mont Ventoux. It says 3 turns up the beast. Now, just to explain this. So cycling from Dieppe to Nice is not hard enough. I decided that as I passed through Provence, I was going to take a short detour to the famous Mont Ventoux. Now, this is a mountain that is often used in the Tour de France, sometimes as a stage end, which seems a bit cruel. In fact, this year, I think they cycled up it a couple of times. But there are 3 paved roads to the top of Mont Ventoux from the 3 villages around the base. And if you complete each one of those ascents in a single day, then you're entitled to join Les Clubs des Cinglés du Ventoux, which, if you speak French, you will know that means the crazies, the madmen of Ventoux, because it's kind of a little bit of a daft thing to do. And of course, that's me all over. I wasn't going to just cycle up once, and I could cycle up 3 times. So that's what I set out to do. Now, the journey there was already epic enough. So this is the Loire Valley, south of Paris. I followed river valleys as far as I could, and old railway lines, because I wanted to make it a bit easier on myself before I got to the mountain itself for the challenge. So Loire Valley, beautifully flat, very shallow, fast-flowing river, really, really stunning landscapes. And then after the Loire came the Rhône, which is a very popular cycling route. And now we're kind of halfway down France by now. So the weather was absolutely stunning, even in September. Lots of families out, lots of people out riding their bikes and enjoying the scenery. And as you can see, it's a very different character. So much more hilly and very deep. So rather than a shallow river, it's very deep, and it seems much more calm. Lots of opportunities for swimming. And the cycle path along the Rhône is still flat though, because it's right next to the river. So most of the time you are just riding between these incredibly beautiful hills with vineyards heading up the hillsides on either side. So yeah, absolutely wonderfully picturesque. After 10 days, I reached Provence, and this is the final day before reaching Mont Ventoux, where it gets very hilly and very wild, and the rocks are just bigger than any I'd seen. Really quite epic landscapes. So, oh, that's a bit small. Oh, I hope that, that's annoying. Okay, so this is the top of Mont Ventoux. This is the famous weather tower at the top. The mountain is 1909 meters above sea level. And when any cyclist has ever been there says it's like cycling on the moon. It's completely out of any experience you might have ever had. I started my first ascent on at 6 a.m. to get the first climb out of the way before it got really hot. It took me 3 hours. Oh no, my screen, hang on, let me see if I can show this slightly differently, because that picture is not right. There you go, now you can see the picture. Okay, so that is summit number 1 at 9:30 in the morning, or 9 a.m. It took me 3 hours to get out there. And yeah, raring to go, super loads of energy, bike on the shoulder, done. Okay, then I headed down the mountain. It took me about an hour to get down again. It's a really horrible ascent. I don't like descent. I don't really like descending. I get a bit scared. But down to the second village, Malolsen, and then back up again. So this is summit number 2. It's about midday by now. So the first time I got to the top, there was no one there. Well, I was one person there who took my picture. Second time, the summit is heaving. It's and you can see how many stickers are on that summit photo. Really, really popular challenge to undertake. But yeah, I was about halfway through at this point. So top for the second time. Then the second descent comes down to Salt, which is the village which is closest to the summit in terms of elevation. So the third climb is the easiest, thank goodness, because by that time I was very tired, and I made my third ascent by 7 p.m. So I'd been cycling up the same mountain for more than 12 hours, looking very jubilant in this picture, looking very exhausted in this one. It was a absolutely phenomenal challenge, but a completely crazy one, hence the Sanglé de Ventoux. Anyway, so I carried on riding after that the very next day, and made it all the way to Nice, and I had my sea swim. Whoa! So yeah, that was a wonderful, wonderful challenge, and a really fantastic way to kind of expand my cycle touring into Europe. And yeah, I mean, France is on our doorstep, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, all of these places are on our doorstep for cycle touring, which is fantastic. I'm going to see if I can go back to my slideshow view now. Okay, here we go. Right, now then, here I am. So this is the return journey from Nice. Now, one of the things I noticed when I was swimming in the sea in Nice was how, because the airport for Nice is right on the beach. So one of the things that really disturbed the peace every few minutes was airplanes taking off, a lot of private jets down that way. And I looked at the beach and I thought, I bet most of the people sitting on that beach have flown here. And that's just how we travel, isn't it? You know, we want our holidays, we want our sun, and we book our flights. And of course, that's not what I did. I got on the train home, and so this is the TGV that goes direct from Nice to Paris. It's one train. It's a bit of a jigsaw because it doesn't take bikes, so you have to put your bike in a bag. So I took it apart. I took it completely apart. Everything came off, and into the bag it went, which meant it was quite. Yeah, carrying a bike is much harder than rolling a bike, especially with all that luggage as well. But it meant that I was able to travel back by train in a low carbon sustainable way. So the carbon difference from taking that high speed electric train across France was 90% savings on the emissions of if I'd flown. And that is something that speaks very powerfully to me. For a journey like that across France, it took only 9 hours to get from Nice all the way back to London. And a journey that was so enjoyable that it's absolutely worth every minute. So of course, overland travel takes longer. Although having said that, sure, like the flight time's 2 hours, but it doesn't like the journey's not 2 hours. You know, you're standing in a queue at an airport for at least two on top of that, and baggage claim and all that, and getting to and from the airport in the first place. So journey times, the advantage in time for the journey isn't that great when compared to overland travel, especially because when you travel overland, you depart from the centre of town and you arrive in the centre of town. So, but yeah, the journey itself, I kind of, it was that magical experience of watching and feeling the entire trip just unfold on itself. So over the course of the journey between Nice and Paris, I went along, it goes along the coast to start with to Marseille, and then it goes straight up the middle of France. And watching Mont Ventoux out of the train window, oh my goodness, that was so epic. And, you know, seeing the landscape fly by and being able to get out of your seat whenever you like and go and get a glass of wine and, you know, enjoy relaxing and talking to people, having other people getting on and off the train and speaking the local language is something that really does enrich your experience in a way that air travel doesn't. So these experiences just cement my resolve not to fly. But yeah, mostly it is about the emissions. So this is, I guess that's my primary motivation. Let me just check on my next pictures. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that leads me onto the campaign that I run. So as Roxanne said, I'm the director of a campaign group called Flight Free UK. Here is one of our pledge card, one of our leaflets. So we run a pledge which asks for people to take a year off flying. So we ask for, it's a behaviour change campaign. We ask people to take a flight-free year, and I know we've all been taking a flight-free year the last couple of years, but this is specifically for the climate rather than just for COVID. So the idea is that by doing that and by challenging yourself to that, or by trying to travel by other means, you perhaps break a habit or you simply discover other ways. So, and you might discover that those other ways are, as I've explained, much more enjoyable and relaxing and even just possible. So, for example, if you travel to Mallorca every year, you can access Mallorca by train and ferry. If it's Barcelona, if it's Venice, if it's Berlin, all of these places can be accessed easily by train and by ferry from the UK. And just by trying that out, that leads to the longer term behaviour change. So it might be that you're not going to stay flight free for life, but that's okay. But just generally reducing after the flight free year is the idea. So that's the campaign that I've been running for 3 years now. And yeah, traveling back from France by train was a really neat illustration of why it's not just great for the environment, it's also really great for the traveller. So my project this year, and I'm just going to scoot onto my final slide. So yeah, it's a little bit pixelated, sorry about that. So this machine fights climate change. This picture was taken on the ride I've just done. So I have cycled here to the COP. And the hashtag at the bottom of that sign, Ride the Change. So that's the group I cycled with. There were 70 riders riding from London to Glasgow for this climate conference. Overall, there were about 170 people who joined here and there. Quite a few people on the first day to see us off, a few extras on the final day to bring us in. And I guess the idea was to travel to the COP in a sustainable, low carbon way. We didn't invite Boris Johnson. He wouldn't have come. First of all, we want to demonstrate that it's possible to travel in low carbon ways and that it's enjoyable. It took us 8 days to get here. And the days ranged between kind of 60 miles and like 90, I think was the top day. The 90-mile day was from Preston to Penrith, and it crossed the moors at the very end of the day. And that was just absolute epic cycling and really beautiful landscapes. And I'm sure everybody who's attending this event understands that riding is a very involving experience and something that you never forget. And that kind of leads me to explain my current project that I'm doing, which is called 52 Bike Rides. So the ride to the COP is part of this. 52 Bike Rides is a way that I am creating memories this year in the middle of the pandemic. So we've all had our travel restricted the last couple of years, and at the beginning of the year I thought, I do not want to spend another year just being at home. So every week this year, I'm taking a different bike ride. And so hence 52 bike rides. So it's one for each week. And by the end of the year, I will have another book and more importantly, a list of rich experiences that I've experienced this year. So the rides range from really hyper local ones, and the idea there is to demonstrate that you can find adventure almost literally on your doorstep. I've discovered so many interesting adventurous routes near where I live that I would never have gone down before were it not for this project. And I have also done quite a few long distance ones as well. So one of the rides was an overnight 100 miles overnight to Bournemouth to see a friend of mine. We did some good sea swimming after that one. And I have cycled to the sea several times over the course of the year. Obviously, this ride up to COP is a bit epic as well. I did one with my brother-in-law, which was the Three Peaks Challenge by bike. So obviously, we hiked up each of the mountains, Snowdon, Scafell Pike, and Ben Nevis, but we rode our bikes between each one. So that was another 7-day trip. But yeah, other than that, apart from those kind of consecutive day epic journeys, there were many. Most of them have just been single day, short, long, local, far, whatever it is. So yeah, it has been really remarkable, and it's kind of my protest, against well, not really protest, but my way to sow adventure into my life in a year where it's very difficult to do that. So yeah, if you want to find out more about that project, you can follow me on Twitter, which is Eat Sleep Cycle, and my hashtag that I'm using for that is hashtag 52 bike rides. So I will finish by saying, obviously I'm here at the COP demanding climate action from our leaders. Today we went on a greenwashing march, because that seems to be the answer from the government as to how they're going to reduce emissions. With regards to aviation specifically, the government's tactics are to rely on future technology and offsetting, neither of which actually will drive down emissions reliably now. The thing that will reduce emissions reliably now is to simply reduce the amount we fly. So it's very frustrating as an aviation campaigner to have all this greenwash surrounding aviation. The solution cannot be to wait till electric flights are ready in 2035, because they won't be commercially ready by then, and they will never be ready for long haul flights, which are our most polluting, of course. It's also quite frustrating to see our leaders take private jets for a journey of perhaps 400 miles and say, oh, it's all okay because we're using SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel. So yeah, if this is the tactic of government, which is not surprising, then we can, then basically they're not going to take action, so we need to. So one of the aspects of the campaign here is to make a collective movement of people who are moving away from air travel as a statement and a protest, because it's not just an individual choice. Your individual actions have a ripple effect, but more than that, if we can show that there are thousands of people who are willing to act in this way, we have much more ability to pressure the government, to pressure industry to make the changes we need to see to make low carbon travel the obvious choice. So it's things like taxing aviation fuel. It's things like making train travel cheaper and more accessible. It's things like putting night trains through the Eurotunnel. It's all these things that we need to enable us all to make those low carbon choices. So if you're inspired, please do sign up to our pledge. It's flightfree.co.uk. You can select to be flight free for the year 2022. You can select to just simply not take any holiday flights if you are required to fly for work or for family reasons, or you can make the pledge that I've made, which is to be flight free for life. So I will. I guess I can share the links to the campaign and to my personal website, but just to reiterate those ones, my personal website is annacycles.co.uk, and that's where you can find out about my books and my adventures. My personal Twitter is @EatSleepCycle. The campaign website is flightfree.co.uk, and the campaign Twitter and other social channels is at FlightFree UK. And I'm a couple of minutes shy of my 30 minutes, but that's all from me for now. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, it's gonna be hard to take over after such an epic story. So I'm gonna be talking about my journey, how I visited every single street in central London. And that's much more casual, adventure than honest. So I am originally coming from a small northern eastern European country called Latvia, and I moved to London 9 years ago. I am computer programmer, and I love cycling and maps. So all of these things I wanted to combine in some manner. And yeah, I moved to London 9 years ago, and because I just love the city and just wanted to experience that a little bit more than just visiting. So my regular day commute starts here, somewhere around this area, and I end up around that area. So, and I'm doing this commute on a bike, and normal practice would be just having like 25 minutes cycle ride using one of these bridges. There are a couple other options, but over time, taking the same route becomes kind of a little bit stale and boring, and I just wanted to kind of diversify my cycling experience and just to see something else, something a little bit more than the same streets every day. So I was thinking about the ways how could I capture every single path that I'm taking, so I could vary a little bit my routes to work. So I decided to purchase. I know that there are different ways how people mark places where they visit. So, for example, there is a scratch maps, or there are sites where you can mark every country that you have visited. For example, this is the list of countries that I've visited in my lifetime. And yeah, I thought maybe I can just get a map, like A to Z London map, and grab so it looks about like this. This is the whole area, and just grab a Sharpie and just color in every single route that I've taken. So and over time I kind of found the process of coloring the streets very addictive. So as soon as I started coloring in the streets, I am kind of completionist by nature. I had to color in all of the possible routes that I've had. So and that's how my short 25-minute journey to office kind of expanded to up to 2 hours, because from the central London I had to cycle far to the far outskirts of London, of the central London, just because the route kind of get longer and longer because all the streets in the central part was already done. And how did I achieve it? First thought was just to grab some sort of tracking app. I used Endomondo at the time. Rest in peace. It was a wonderful app, and they just closed it for some reason. But it helped me through this years wonderfully. I'm glad that I had been able to export all the data, because that's very important for me. And that also allowed me to use this app throughout different platforms. I was changing my phones, and still the tracking that was collected, and physical map area was around this, and this is the area that I decided that I want to complete, like every single map street on this area. and over time, yeah, this is one of the snapshots during this process, and I'm just doing this only casually, cycling to work. I'm not like taking special days off just to manage and complete these things. This is just a casual commute, just to office and back home. And at the end, this is the result. So I managed to color in all the streets because I physically visited them. Of course, I'm very cautious about the rules, and I'm always taking them seriously. If the park is not, if there's park paths where you cannot cycle, I'm always taking that thing seriously and pushing my bike and just respecting everyone. But yeah, that was the end result, and here I'm posing proudly, holding my finished Mac project. So while cycling through all of these places, I found some interesting places in London that I didn't know about, like Brompton Cemetery. I found it fascinating place. I didn't know about that area. Alexander Street Estate. I thought it was a wonderful architecture, like a street in between. And I later on saw that in some music videos. Yeah, I always loved cycling in Camden Town and Shoreditch street art and everything. I kind of fell in love with all of the parts of London. Also, this is and all the rest of the places. I always enjoy cycling. Cycling on bike lines because I feel much safer, and visually I enjoy canal paths and old railway tracks whenever it's possible. I'm going to take those routes because they're much quieter, even though there are some people walking around, but it's just nicer and quieter and to cycle those. So how did I dealt with the data was I took, since I'm coder, I exported all the data from Endomundo in the GPX file, then write another code that allowed me to import everything in mapping software called Hughes, and then exported everything into movie, like a short video that allowed me to animate all the routes that I took over almost 4.5 years. And this is the result that I published on some websites after I've did this route. I thought it's just an interesting visualization. I thought maybe some people can find it interesting, so I shared them on some of the media, and I got quite much response. So BBC Radio 4 contacted me for an interview, and also I got publications in so many outlets. That was even quite stressful time for me because I didn't expect that it's gonna get so much attention just because I did like a casual thing, just cycling every day to office and marking it down. But apparently people found it very inspirational. That was also very interesting for me, and I'm very proud that I reached the first page on Reddit. Got featured in BBC a couple of times, and also got like my short little article on Metro magazine that just for casual introvert guy is quite a lot. So in summary, it took me like 5 years, almost 5 years to cycle every single street. Some of the streets were not accessible at the time when I was cycling, but a little time later they were open, and just over time it just took me quite a long time. It was about 1,600 kilometers, 60,000 kilometers or 10,000 miles. It took me about 1,200 journeys, and yeah, so my short 25-minute commute ended up 2 hours, and yeah, it brought me unlimited joy. So yeah, then I exported all of this data again, and I put it all together in black and white animation. I found it even more interesting because it kind of revealed London's grid, the world famous London's grid, just by my journeys. And it also kind of created a beautiful piece of art. Yeah, takes about a minute. And yeah, right when I finished all of this project, the lockdown started, and that was so I didn't have a reason to go anymore to the office, and I had a little bit more free time in the mornings, so I started to take. Since I didn't have a reason to go to office, I wanted to still explore London or something else. So I created a YouTube channel where I just started recording my cycle routes a little bit far to the farther outskirts of London, because I didn't have the motivation to cycle every single street anymore. At least just exploring areas around. So it took me took longer journeys everywhere. So this is kind of map where I've explored everything within my reach. Some of the journeys took up to 4 hours, but it's still right couple hours before work. I wake up early in the morning and just have a very long ride. Yeah, this is quite very casual thing to do. I believe that everyone can do something like that. There are no restrictions on this. I think this is not as impressive as it as it looks, and I think sometimes people just do casual things way too often and just don't see that opportunities of adventure are right under their fingertips. So yeah, I think that's about it. And I did all of that just in my casual clothing. I'm not like a professional cyclist. I don't wear like a proper cycling gear. I cycle around in my jeans and coat, and I think cycling should be accessible for everyone. So sometimes I think if everyone have their professional gear when they're on the street, it kind of gives people like a resentment, and it feels like cycling is there is a barrier to cross just to get on the bike, but actually you don't need it. You don't need a lot of things to cycle. You just need to get a bike that rolls, and that's how you can start exploring even your neighborhood and surroundings. So yeah, I hope you find it inspirational, and it's going to be all for me. So thank you, everyone.
Hi everyone, I am Jayne and this is Sam, and I guess we're here to sort of talk about some of the lessons we learned cycling around the world for a year, and sort of some of our stories and our journeys along the way to hopefully inspire some of you guys to do something similar. So start with how we both got started.
Yeah, so as Rox said earlier, Jayne started by changing her 30-minute walk to a train station with a 10-minute bike journey. And even at that point, she wasn't able to imagine cycling the 10 kilometers to her work. She started on Trevor, a small purple hybrid. And that's how she started cycling around London. And then that bike has now been passed to two more of her friends as they start their own journey.
Yeah. So Sam, growing up, he was lucky that I guess both of his parents cycled. And at different times during his lifetime, they both commuted to work by bike. And when he was younger, he would get around West London on his bike, and that's really all the cycling he did. But slowly, as he got older, I guess he found the joys of cycling and did his first cycle tour, was getting a train to Brighton down on a Friday night after work, meeting up with some friends, and then cycling back over 2 days. and camping on a Saturday night in a village that just happened to have a beer festival on. He says it wasn't planned, but I don't believe him. At that point, 50 kilometres over a weekend seemed like a lot, but they enjoyed themselves and had a lot of fun. Then in 2014, Sam took a week off work and bought the highly practical Eliza, added a pannier rack, some panniers, and cycled to Amsterdam again with his friends. And here's a lovely photo of them getting there.
Yeah, and from Jayne's humble beginnings on Trevor, she caught the cycling bug and naturally started training for an Ironman. This would require to cycle over 180 kilometres, 18 times that 10-kilometre distance she was worried about before. And she also had to do a long swim and cycle. In 2017, Jayne came home from a hen party and asked if we could cycle around the world. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess sort of our first lesson we learned really before we'd even left is that in all things in life, decide you're going to do it, pick a day, tell everyone you're going to do it, and it means that it will probably happen.
So yeah, I was like over the moon that Jayne wanted to cycle around the world, like something I'd always wanted to do, but probably wouldn't have been able to do without Jayne wanting to do it with me. At the time, Jayne was an experienced day cyclist. I had a lot of experience cycling in tents and doing short distances, but we hoped that would balance each other out. Oh, sorry, here are more photos. I need to be better at the sliding slides. Sorry.
So as we left, we thought doing 80 to 100 miles a day would be easy, and we did do it to begin with.
Yeah, we followed the Danube across Europe. We started to eat up the kilometers rather than the calories, unfortunately.
And at the time, I guess I wasn't feeling great about the prospect of wild camping. So we would join up campsites and the occasional warm showers on these really long days in the saddle that we were making ourselves do.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, some people might be familiar with warm showers, but it's an amazing online network of cycle tourists who offer their accommodation and more than occasionally food and drink to other cycle tourists who are on the road. And we use it quite a lot. We'd highly recommend it.
However, after 2 weeks doing these really long miles, we started bickering. And I guess in hindsight, we were just hungry and tired.
Yeah, we were stopping more to eat, and then that was taking up more time. So we weren't making the long distances that we were planning to do. And we were just setting up. I was definitely not fit enough to do it. Like I could do 100 miles for a couple of days, but like trying to do it for even 2 weeks was far too much. And
we started getting this fear at lunchtime that we'd stop for lunch and we still had 60 miles to go. And it was awful.
Yeah. And one day we were planning to meet a friend in Budapest a week or so away. And we worked out how many miles a day we'd have to cycle. And we just the thought of that was just terrifying. And the maths did not look good. So then we had this light bulb moment one breakfast and we're like, why?
Yeah. So we called our friends and said, we'll be late. Sorry, we're not going to make it there on time. And suddenly this massive weight was lifted off our shoulders. We put the pan back on the burner, had another coffee, and changed our routes from 100-mile days to 80 to 100-kilometre days. And this is probably our second lesson we learned. Cycle distances that you're comfortable with and enjoyable for you. Don't set yourselves unrealistic achievements that are just going to struggle with.
Yeah, and this is when we really truly started enjoying cycle touring in Europe.
And we'd find great places for lunch, great spots for wild camping. Some involved visits from some local sheep. And actually, we started to enjoy it and we were just having a really nice time.
Yeah, and managed to meet up our friend in Budapest a little bit later than planned, but that was no problem for us or her. And then we got to Istanbul thinking we were cycle touring pros. We'd got into it and we hadn't had a single puncture. We were having a great time.
So from Istanbul, we flew, from Istanbul to Dushanbe in Tajikistan. We've given you a nice little map here because it's probably where I'm not quite sure where it is. And when we arrived, we cycled out of the airport, got to the hostel and realised we had our first puncture of the trip.
Yeah, so another lesson, never throw away an inner tube. There's always space for another patch.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we did. We were such cycle touring pros that we had one puncture in our brand new inner tube and thought, we'll just get a new one. So from our hostel, we planned our route out of Dushanbe across the famous Pamir Highway, not really knowing what we were letting ourselves in for. We had already decided, we sort of got to the hostel without really having a plan and planned it when we got there.
This is probably a really good time to talk about our bikes. They're still behind us on our wall. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. So we have, our bikes were called Eliza, which was Sam's bike, and the little one, which was mine. And they're both bought on the Cycle to Work scheme a few years beforehand as a cheap entry-level road bike that we could get a rack fitted on. Actually, I didn't have a rack on my bike until a week before we left.
And yeah, these bikes were perfect for London and tarmac cycling. And we really can't imagine that the designers had the Pamir Highway in mind when they were sketching them out for mass production.
So with our really inappropriate bikes, as you can see here between the bikes we had and the bikes of other cycle tourists on the Pamir Highway, we quickly became known in the region as the Brits on bikes, and the Brits on road bikes. And I don't think this was an affectionate term.
Yeah, and 2 days out of Dushanbe, the tarmac ends and the punches begin.
So I think this is our last stop before the tarmac ended. So, and then we suddenly started getting punctures. And after 8 punctures a day, we decided that was enough. And rather than going from how many kilometers we were going to do in a day, we planned our days on how many punctures we would get. On the plus side, we became very good at changing punctures.
Yeah. So we got a lift over the Kurog Pass as the roads were going to get even worse, and we were kind of worried about our bikes holding up to the torment we were going to put them through, let alone the punches. However, the punches didn't stop. On this section of the road, we got 2 vehicles, and both of them still managed to get punches on the pass. So we kind of felt a little better about ourselves at that point.
Yeah, or maybe that we were cursed.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Anyway, despite all of our punctures that we talk about, this was such a great section of our trip. The scenery was breathtaking. The locals were lovely. And there were just loads of cycle tourists going in both directions. So there was always someone to cycle with, to camp with, to have that little chat on the route, because one was going in one direction, the other was going there. And it was, some of the best cycling I think we've ever done. Yeah,
the water was flowing from the mountain streams. The food was scarce and bland, but still great. And we still had the best donuts we'd ever had at the top of a pass.
Yeah, so these famous donuts, as they turned out to be, powered us up one of the second highest roads in the world, and where we stopped to camp around 4,000 meters.
Yeah.
So for this whole time, for the majority of our time in Tajikistan, we spent most of it above 3,000 meters. And so this was the highest point at just over 4,000 meters.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
This is also just as a note. My mum hasn't actually seen these photos yet, and I know she's watching. So sorry, Mum.
Yeah. So we stopped and camped for the night, and the next morning. So these are our
this photo.
So the next morning, Sam woke up, and moved from inside this room building to as far away he could get, and just passed out, not being able to move. He wasn't in a good way and needed more food and water than we had.
Yeah.
So
Jayne flagged down a car and took us across the border into Kyrgyzstan, into the next town of Saritash to find a homestay. It was a massive upgrade from where I currently was, and I still felt pretty rough.
Yeah, so the left-hand side is where he started and the right is where he ended. But after a couple of days with little improvement and worrying if his sister was ever gonna look after his fantasy football team properly, that was his general worries when he couldn't eat or drink anything for multiple days. The local doctor gets a call and takes Sam to the clinic to get an IV drip.
I hope this is slightly inspiring because it does get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, after a couple of drips and some injections, I got a really good night's sleep, and we moved further down the mountain to the main town of Auch for a hostel, some more home comforts, and a toilet that was more than a walk outside away, or less than a walk outside away.
Yeah, which was a massive upgrade for Sam. So while Sam spent the next few days trying to get better, I entertained myself with all the other cycle tourists in Auch, testing out the local delicacies.
And when Jayne deemed that I was ready to leave, I probably could have stayed for another week, but that's kind of always my way. We headed back to Saritash, and again, with a night on the Kyrgyzstan border, we met an official, and he took us to meet their family. So instead of crossing the border, we spent an extra day with them, talking to them and having some food and having a really nice time. So another lesson, always accept hospitality when it's offered to you.
And having crossed the border into China, I don't know how much people know about that. It is quite an interesting experience.
Very welcoming.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, barbed wire all the way around. There are rumours about having your belongings searched, phones taken, and apps loaded onto them. They aren't rumours; they are true. We were held in a room with other tourists until a minivan was ready to take us up and drive us the 150 kilometres from the border to the customs check across what is effectively no man's land. But after all this, we made it to Kashgar.
Yeah, and we literally spent that whole day, the first day in Kashgar, just absolutely eating everything we could possibly find. And then we spent some time fixing up our bikes, kind of took over this bike shop to the amusement of the mechanic in there. And yeah, got on our way.
Yes, so we left Kashgar with lots of food, lots of patches, lots of inner tubes to push us through along the North Silk Road, along the what's known as the Taklamakan Desert. And here we had these lovely service roads that would run parallel to the main road, which was great for cycling. It was almost like your own private cycle lane.
Yeah, and for the most part, we were cycling from town to town, from truck stop to truck stop, eating plates of freshly made noodles the whole time. And the only thing we had to worry about was carrying enough water.
Which brings us to our next lesson that we learned: never run out of water, which in fairness to us, we only came close to one day in Australia when we had to battle a headwind. So we were very good at carrying enough water that we needed. So as we're in the northwest of China at this point, in an area called Xinjiang, which is a police state, and therefore every town you'd go into, you would be welcomed, is an optimistic way of saying it, with a police checkpoint checking our IDs and everyone else's. It wasn't just because we were tourists that we had greater scrutiny. Actually, I think we had less scrutiny because we were tourists, and they were just monitoring the movement of the people around the state. And there was this feeling of being a bit scared, I think.
Yeah, and I think these feelings were heightened as you'd cycle past these abandoned towns that had been made redundant by the building of a bigger road next to them. You can see it in the background there. And everyone had been moved to like more denser cities. And
so we'd overcome our concerns about wild camping through Europe and had fully embraced the wild camping lifestyle. And actually, it's now I left hating camping, and during this trip, I fell in love with camping, and especially wild camping. There's just something so amazing about it. But wild camping in China is illegal. So we would hide every night in these storm drains under the road. So we weren't seen. While they aren't the most, aesthetic place to sleep, they were great because they covered you from the rain, the wind, they were flat. So actually, we quite liked them. But it did then mean that at every checkpoint, we would have to sort of be a bit flexible with the truth about where we'd come from and where we were going.
Yeah, and at one checkpoint that we kind of both really remember, I got our towns mixed up and kind of gave them an absolute ridiculous distance we possibly couldn't have cycled in a day. And we were going to somewhere else, and they were asking us all these questions about where we stayed, and just kind of it was repeating and repeating. And this was all through like a translation app on the phone. And it was getting a bit like uncomfortable. And thankfully, after an hour, something else came up and they let us go. And to put it in perspective, these checks normally take an hour, 5 minutes. They check your passports, they scan them in, and then you take a selfie like this. We have lots of these photos.
Yes, they do love a selfie. And at one point, we got to a checkpoint, and the police said we couldn't cycle on. So a car ride and 2 buses later, we were 300 kilometers down the road. And as we pulled into the bus terminal to change buses, we realized that the person sitting next to us was actually one of the police officers who was unknowingly to us escorting us from where we were to where we were going.
Yeah, and after we left the area, we kind of obviously found out about the spatial control and the oppression of the Uyghurs and their imprisonment. And while China is known for their surveillance, this region takes it to a much greater level. And we weren't aware of what was happening at the time, but you could really feel that people were guarded and suspicious.
So after around 4 weeks in Xinjiang and realizing how lucky we were that we could leave, we crossed over into the next province, which was Gansu, and the atmosphere just totally changed. We went from hostility and closed people to the most warm, generous and welcoming people we had ever met. There was sometimes you couldn't go very far because people would be stopping us to take photos.
Yeah. And a couple of days later, we met Dr. Tom, someone Jayne had met while I was past Aranosh, and he came into the shop after us and casually asked where we were heading. We spent the next 4 weeks cycling with him.
He'd later tell us on one of our cycles that he'd actually was halfway through having lunch, saw us walk past, and then ran out of this restaurant to find us to catch up with us down the road so he could have someone to cycle with.
Yeah, and cycling with someone else really made us realize how inefficient we were at getting ready in the morning. He'd be packed up before we'd even had our morning coffee and porridge. But as the trip went on, we realized this is unlikely to change, and we just accepted it and embraced it.
Yeah, so while we were very, I guess, on our speedy bikes, fast on the cycling, we were quite leisurely and everything else. But it did bring us on to our next lesson, and probably our biggest lesson is that there is no right or wrong way to cycle tour. It was about working out what works best for you and how you enjoy your time. And we liked having leisurely mornings, drinking our coffee in these beautiful surroundings.
Yeah, and so selfie after selfie after selfie, even with the police, we made great progress across China. We ventured to Xi'an with Dr. Tom.
We attended weddings, birthdays, family get-togethers, and we were offered more food than we knew what to eat, than we could eat or carry.
Yeah, and so obviously never say no to the offer of food or hospitality.
But we did learn that if we didn't say no at some point, we would keep being brought food until we did say no. So we did have to break our rules occasionally.
Yeah.
And then from China, we moved to Australia, and Australia was much like being on a turbo trainer, which is a static bike. There were these long stretches of flat roads, really only broken up by stops for food and water, and sights of kangaroos along the way. We saw a lot of kangaroos, which are very cool to see as you're cycling along, seeing them running off in the distance.
Yeah, and for the longest, straightest section of Australia, we had the luxury of being fully supported for a week when my mum and my friend Justine came out. Who joined us in an RV, bring with them copious amounts of food and wine to assist our crossing of the Nullarbor. And yeah, so this will come up again, but when you'll go away for a long, long time, plan to meet up with as many friends and family along the way.
Yeah, it was a great thing for us to look forward to and sort of really motivate us through some of the harder days. And and normally they bring with them food and beer, which I would say is a cyclist dream. And after the luxury of an RV for a week, we were soon brought down to cycle-touring Earth when our next night's accommodation happened to be a public toilet.
We hadn't planned to stay the night there, but we stopped to take a break from the rain. And as it was covered, we stayed there. The rain got worse, and we decided that we should probably spend the night there. Probably not the worst place we stayed, and we were very happy to stay dry.
Yeah, so yeah, try and stay dry at all costs, I think. So next we moved to New Zealand, and here in New Zealand, the landscape did not disappoint. It was beautiful with these amazing roads and amazing scenery and these hot springs by the side of the road, which were just lovely to have a little dip in around lunchtime. And the weather was perfect. And while wild camping is illegal in New Zealand, we found that rather than camping in drains, we could just ask farmers to camp on their land, which would often result in fresh eggs and milk for scrambled eggs in the morning. So here we woke up one morning with a lovely delivery from the farmer of the freshest eggs and milk we had ever tasted.
Yeah, the Pamir had like battle hardened us, I think. At this point, we were really settled into cycle touring. Not much could phase us, and we were really, really enjoying it. Even when faced with this mechanical of my spokes coming away, like shearing away from my rear hub, we kind of took it in our stride, and I wouldn't say embraced it, but it wasn't the end of the world.
And here it's really about like, you'll always find a solution. Things don't always go to plan, and a part on your bike might break that you can't fix, and we just have to embrace it. And actually it meant that we had a lot longer than expected in Auckland with two of our really good friends, and due to a fire in the Shimano distribution centre. And it just, I don't know, we don't know what's going to happen, because since then we haven't been able to see them for over 2 years. So it was nice to spend that extra time with them at the time.
Yeah, we got to celebrate Christmas with them, visit Hobbiton with them. And after New Zealand, we met up with Jayne's mum, her partner and sister, and a hand-built wheel from our local bike shop in West London.
Yeah, as we realised that was the most efficient way to get a new wheel to us, was via England and our local bike shop. So leaving Vancouver, we cycled down the 1 and the 101, and it was fantastic. We did leave Vancouver in, if you've sort of worked out, Christmas in New Zealand, Vancouver in January. So it was quite cold and a bit rainy. But with the rain, it just meant we had the joys of warm showers and meeting so many great people along the way of the West Coast, and finding all about their lives and just the lives of normal people in the slight differences of the countries was so great.
Yeah, we were wrapped up nice and warm, but cycling there in the off season did mean that we had less RVs on the roads, and the days that were sunny, we really just got to take it all in. The beautiful redwoods and the views of the coast.
Yeah, it was very lovely. So arriving into LA, Sam feels like he's had enough cycling for the moment. And after a game of football, he ruined the surprise.
I don't think anyone is.
He falls ill again with another chest infection. So we end up taking a week out of our trip, as Sam gets much needed hospital care and some R&R.
So this is a really good lesson. If you're going to get ill, get in America and not Kyrgyzstan. The levels of hospital are a lot higher, and it's slightly nicer for Jayne as well, rather than being in the middle of nowhere. But getting travel insurance is just kind of a must, especially in America. Yeah,
on a serious note, make sure if you're going away, you have good travel insurance. Ours were amazing for this, and it was not a problem at all.
Once I recovered, we flew to Bolivia, and I risked my life again by going back to 4,000 meters above sea level. At this point, I made Jayne promise me that if I ever said I wanted to climb Everest, to just tell me to go away. We left for dizzying heights of La Paz and spent the next 3 months cycling around South America, cycling to Argentina via the Bolivian salt flats.
And we stumbled across the world's second largest carnival, these beautiful vineyards. And also we were lucky enough to be in a town when the home team won their football.
It's great.
Yeah. And we also found some more lovely local hospitality by being invited into a gaucho, which is an Argentine farmer's hut, to warm ourselves by the fire while eating the freshest steaks we've ever eaten.
Yeah, these days there was some hard days cycling. We battled some headwinds across the La Pampas, and we had our biggest day climbing of the year going over the Andes. But with enough food and the sun on the backs, we were making great progress. And I think everyone knows this, but it's always worth saying the best way to get cycle fit is to cycle.
So we flew up and over the Andes, and I feel Sam said in a moment of lightheadedness that actually he enjoyed hills, as you got to take in the scenery going that bit slower meant you just appreciated what was around you a bit more.
I really don't know what came over me.
And then after 10 months away in around the rest of the world, we arrived back in Europe and actually found that some of our favourite cycling was in...
I've added too many slides, haven't I?
Yeah. These are all the lovely times of us in South America.
Back in Europe.
Yeah, we actually found that some of our favourite cycling was in Spain and France.
Yeah, when we got back, we weren't in any rush. We were fit and we knew what we enjoyed throughout the day. We spent 2 weeks cycling back through Spain and France to get back to London. Yeah, the one thing that we did forget was that Europe closes on a Sunday. I don't know if you put that photo in. But yeah, so the only thing you have to remember is Europe closes on a Sunday often, so you're kind of scrambling around for food. But yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and these were our last few nights.
Yeah, this was our last night camping of the whole trip.
And I guess we just want to finish by saying that everyone cycle tours differently. We didn't set off on, I guess, with the right bikes, with the right equipment.
Okay.
But we made it work for us and we had a great time doing it. You'll also find online and everywhere that everyone has opinion on the right way to cycle, but that's just the right way for them. Learn about it, take their hints and tips on board, but it's not the hard and fast rule of how you do it. And start with small trips, find out what works for you and what you enjoy.
Yeah, and almost echoing points made earlier, you don't actually have to go very far to find some really good cycle touring or cycling in general. We found on a year out that cycling through these countries allowed us to see the place like we never normally would. But like this summer we did Landon to John O'Groats, and it was really nice to see the UK. And hopefully soon we'll be able to go to France and Spain and go back there and enjoy some cycling there.
Yeah, and cycling was just such a great way to meet so many amazing people and go, we were going through towns and villages who wouldn't never see us, a cyclist for fun is just unheard of for them. And people are much kinder, they're really engaging, and they're so much more approachable to you when you're on a bike rather than any other mode of transport. Maybe because there's that moment of sort of sympathy and admiration that you don't really get with other vehicles. So I think it's just, remember to eat while you are cycling. Remember to eat and drink lots of water is one of our other key facts.
Yeah.
You cannot survive without that.
And yeah, we'd just like to thank everyone who put today together and the other speakers. We've had a lot of fun reviewing our year and putting this little presentation together.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. What we're going to do now is spotlight all the speakers, and we'll go back to some of the question and answers. And if we can all, I think Davis and Anna have already got some questions in mind. They've been looking through the Q&As. It will give Sam and Jayne a bit of time as well to have a look through them. So I don't know if who wants to start out of Anna or Davis?
I could go if you like. Just to, sorry everybody, the football's now started. So if you can hear football in the background, I'll try to speak clearly. Students' Union, taking me back to my student days. Okay, so there have been a couple of questions about bikes on trains, which I will answer in a second. A couple about camping and route and mileage. And beginners tips, but I should probably start with that because what Sam and Jayne just said is exactly what I would echo. As you just said, Jayne, really, really accurately, everybody cycle tours differently. And it's, and what I said at the beginning, I didn't really know anything about cycle touring. I knew a lot about riding my bike, but I didn't know anything about cycle touring. But literally, there was nothing that I needed to know that the road didn't teach me. And I feel like it's a bit of a cliche, like the first step is the hardest, but it kind of is. You can spend months and years making excuses as to why you don't go on the trip, but once you start the trip, that's half of it is done. And kind of okay, so echoing the tips we just heard: eat and drink properly, eat before you're hungry, drink before you're thirsty. It's so important. You do not want to be left out on a Sunday afternoon in France with nothing to eat. Have a basic knowledge of how your bike works, because if anything's loose on your bike, it will rattle loose as you ride. If you can do some kind of basic tightening of things, if you've got an Allen key, a multi-tool with a chain tool on it is really good. I know this sounds quite scary if you've never fixed a chain before, but kind of doing that kind of basic maintenance before you go and learning a few little things will really just help you keep rolling. Snapped hub though. Well done, guys. And yeah, I think I guess that's kind of it. Like, be prepared for the weather, but equally, like, yeah, I mean, just roll with it. And that sounds a bit of a cliche as well, but hey, run bikes, roll with it. Okay, so the specific questions about my trips were about, did I camp, what was the route, and how many miles a day do I do? Now, I'm going to be really annoying and answer that final question by saying, count smiles, not miles. And yeah, sure, you know, I'm a bit obsessed with miles sometimes, but actually I really try not to be, because it doesn't matter how far you go. I've had days which have been a full day cycling in which I've only done I've cycled 25 miles, and I've done days which have been a full day cycling and I've cycled over 100, and that's okay. Both of those are absolutely the right way to do it. I really believe in that saying, count smiles, not miles. So when I cycled around Britain, I was not into camping. I was on a cycle tour, not a camping trip, and I steadfastly did not take a tent. And I pre-arranged all my accommodation in advance, so I kind of had somewhere to aim for every night. At the time, I was working for Sustrans, so I emailed the entire staff team and said, "Do you know anyone who lives on the coast?" And I pretty much sorted out all my accommodation for free. It was amazing. And someone asked about the reciprocal, the free accommodation for cyclists, which is warm showers. So I'm sure we've all used warm showers here on the panel, warmshowers.org. And I have hosted cyclists in my home through warm showers, and I have been hosted many times from cyclists through warm showers. And that has been a wonderful experience, a great way to meet people and a great way to have a lovely shower at the end of the day. For my subsequent tours, I have camped on every single one of them. So I've kind of got over my dislike of camping. I think I never really hated camping. I just think I didn't do it properly. But now I've got all the kit and I'm quite good at it now. So yeah, you just go with what is comfortable. If you don't want to camp, don't camp. If you want a credit card tour. You know, now I do camping and I do it enjoyably. So that's important. And I take a real feather pillow. That's my little luxury. And the final question, route, sorry. Route is also hard to answer because I kind of make it up as I go along, and that's not helpful either, but Google Maps do great suggested cycle routes. Sustrans does a great mapping system. You can look at any cycle route in the UK, and that's how I do it. But the final question is bikes on trains. Yes, wow, that leaves a lot to be desired, doesn't it? Okay, tip number 1. I have just booked my train return from Glasgow back to London, and I booked my bike on Twitter. If you go to, I've wasted hours of my life on booking apps trying to get the right person to speak to, not even booking apps, like on the phone, in person at the booking office, trying to get my bike booked on the train. So if you're traveling on an intercity train, you do need to book in advance, like Avanti West Coast, LNER, GWR down to Bristol and the West Country. So yes, you will need a bike reservation for any of those. But I have found that over the last few years, you just go onto whichever social media platform you use, send a message to the person to the company in question, and just say, I would like to book my bike onto whatever train you've booked. For this particular one, I said, I haven't booked my train yet because I want to check there's a bike space first. I'm looking at this train. The person on the other end, within a couple of minutes, said, yes, there's a bike space. I booked the train, done, 10 minutes, a breeze. I would recommend it as a way to book your bike. Traveling internationally is harder because currently the Eurostar is not taking bikes. Now, when I traveled back from Nice, I booked in advance to take my fully assembled bike, and they take perhaps 2 or 4 per train. All the others you'd have to box up and take as luggage. It's not very friendly and it's not easy. And the campaign groups such as Cycling UK, Sustrans, London Cycling Campaign do put pressure on these train carriers to provide better cycling infrastructure and carriage. So that is a way to do it. Eurostar's not taking bikes right now. I guess the alternative is just to get a ferry. If you know, cycling onto a ferry is a breeze, and it's a cool thing to do, you know. So any trips off the UK at the moment with a bike, I would recommend taking the ferry. But yeah, I think across Europe there are some excellent bike facilities, and there are some that are just not good. So I think as a rule of thumb, you can usually take your bike on a local train. You just roll up and go. If it's a high speed or international train, you would have to book it. So yeah, just do some research. And one final tip here, this is for flight-free travel and for bikes on trains. If you go to seat61.com, it's a wonderful website set up by a guy called Mark Smith. He is AKA the man in seat 61. And it's an entire encyclopedia about how to travel the entire world without flying. And he has a page on bikes on trains. And that is the most help I can probably give you. And thanks for all your questions and for listening. It was I very much enjoyed giving the talk, and thanks to the other guys as well. They were great to listen to too.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. And Dave, would you like to take your questions?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I had a couple of questions. One question, what did I learn about cycling in London, and what surprised me? Well, I used to cycle in Riga in Eastern Europe, and I have to say that cycling in London is wonderful and amazing. Even if within cycling community there are bunch of stigma, people are like not really pleased with the London cycling infrastructure, and they're comparing with Amsterdam or Copenhagen always. It's amazing. If you've been in if you travel the world and you've seen some farther eastern countries, you know that cycling infrastructure in Europe overall is very good. So that's it's not really surprising. It's just my observation. And yeah, there are a lot of wonderful places in London to see and look, and a lot of cycling roads, especially alongside the canals or old railway tracks. These are the most enjoyable, very quiet, very nice, straight, nice route. I suggest everyone who is in London just to enjoy them. And the second question to me was, when you got to the edge of the map, did you stop and turn around where you were happy? Yeah, I was happy and sad at the same time when I reached the edges of my map, because I grew to love all of these areas, especially since I was cycling in the very early mornings. I saw the city waking up every single day, and within those areas kind of fell in love with each part of London. I saw how people are bringing their kids to schools, and I kind of said hi to traffic controllers, and it just I kind of felt sad each time when I had to move to the other area, because just everywhere. I think London in the mornings is just a wonderful and actually safe space. If I wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning just to have a very long cycle ride along everywhere in London, it just feels very safe. In the early mornings, it's the quietest and safest time to cycle. Yeah, that would be it for me.
Awesome, thank you so much, David. Sam and Jayne, did you have a chance to check over some questions?
Yeah, I think we were asked how we felt coming back from like a year-long trip and coming back to normality. How do you feel, Jayne?
I would say I was ready for it to end. I think we came back at just the right time, because it was still exciting, it was still different, it was still new. But I do remember feeling I'm okay being home, but I really also wish I was out there. And I think it's finding that balance between the two. And I guess it was when we came back, it wasn't really normality. We didn't really have anywhere to stay. We were staying at Sam's mum's for most of it. So it was kind of just sort of getting our feet, getting ourselves back together and finding a job and things like that. So that's kind of the next adventure really for us.
Yeah, I think, I was talking so much about like how we should make cycling better for probably too much of the trip that Jayne was just like, well, go and do it then. And so I guess the epilogue is I ended up working for Sustrans and still do. So I was very fortunate there, and it's been a phenomenal 2 years back because of Sustrans and many other reasons. But there's still possibilities for future trips. Just got some ideas.
And I guess the planning a route, well, we sort of marked on a map the key places we wanted to go, and we really planned it we sort of planned it week by week, really, in terms of the next big city or the next big sort of point that we were going to get to, and then broke it up by day. But in terms of the actual routes we did, I know Anna mentioned a few, but we also used this great app called Komoot, which was very useful and told you all the elevation and things like that.
Yeah, you knew what scary hills were coming for you.
So I guess we sort of had the key points we wanted on the route, and then once we got going, we broke it up really by weeks, and then each day we would decide, like at the end of each day, we would decide where we're going to go the next day.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I just want to say a big thank you again to all the speakers. Thank you so much to Megan and Alistair for putting this together as well, for volunteering their time. And hopefully all of those who are listening have been inspired somehow to take on their own adventure, their long distance sustainable adventure. So thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.